Chapter 1. The text that ended everything. Have you ever had a single moment, not a fight, not a conversation, not even a word, just a moment, where everything you thought was real quietly collapsed? Not dramatically, not with screaming or breaking glass, just silence, and the sound of your own breathing, and the slow, terrible realization that the life you were living was never entirely yours. That moment for me happened on a Tuesday evening in October. It was our 7th wedding anniversary. I remember exactly what I was wearing. A deep blue wrap dress I bought 3 weeks earlier specifically for that night. I remember the smell of my perfume, Jo Malone, peony and blush suede. David had given it to me the previous Christmas, and I had saved the last of it for special occasions without even realizing I was doing it. I remember standing in front of the bathroom mirror, looking at myself and thinking, 7 years. We made it. David had texted me at 2:47 that afternoon. Reservations at Enzo's. 8 p.m. Wear the blue dress. I remember smiling at my phone like a teenager. I remember feeling grateful. I remember thinking that maybe the distance I had felt between us lately, the quietness, the distraction, the nights he came home after I was already asleep, maybe all of that was just stress. Work pressure. The kind of thing that happens to every marriage eventually. I told myself that over and over on the drive to Enzo's. Enzo's is a small Italian place on the north side of Chicago. Dark wood tables, candles and wine bottles. The kind of restaurant where the waiters remember your name if you've been twice. David and I had gone there on our 3rd date. He had ordered for both of us in broken Italian, and made me laugh so hard I spilled my water. That was the man I married. I arrived at 7:58. I gave David's name to the host. He smiled and led me to a table near the window. I sat down. I ordered sparkling water. I waited. At 8:20 I checked my phone. No messages. At 8:35 I called him. 3 rings. Voicemail. At 8:41 I texted, "Hey, I'm here. Table by the window. Everything okay?" At 8:53 my phone buzzed. I picked it up expecting David. It was my sister Cara. The message said, "Are you almost here? The food is getting cold." I stared at that message for a very long time. Cara lived 20 minutes from Enzo's. She knew I was supposed to be at dinner with David tonight. I had told her myself 3 days earlier on the phone. She had said, "That's so sweet. You two are goals." I read the message again. "Are you almost here? The food is getting cold." She had meant to send it to someone else. She had been in a hurry or distracted or careless, and she had sent it to me. I put my phone face down on the table. I took 1 sip of my sparkling water. Then I picked up my purse, left 2 20s on the table for the waiter who had refilled my glass twice without being asked, and walked out of Enzo's into the cold October air. I drove to Cara's apartment on autopilot. I didn't call anyone. I didn't play music. I drove in complete silence with both hands on the wheel and a feeling in my chest that I can only describe as the opposite of panic. A cold, spreading stillness, like every emotion I had ever felt was being slowly submerged under ice. I turned onto her street. David's car was parked directly in front of her building. A silver Audi A6. The one I had helped him pick out. The one with the small scratch on the rear bumper from when he'd reversed into a parking barrier at O'Hare, and sworn me to secrecy about it. I pulled over half a block away. I turned off my engine. I sat in the dark for 19 minutes. I know because I watched the clock on my dashboard move from 9:11 to 9:30. I could have driven away. I almost did. Twice I put my hand on the ignition. Twice I pulled it back. But something made me walk to that door. And what I found on the other side of it changed the remaining course of my entire life. Chapter 2. The girl who was always second. Before I tell you what happened when that door opened, you need to understand something about who I am. And more importantly, who I was allowed to be in my family. My name is Elena Marsh. I'm 34 years old. I'm a senior financial compliance analyst at a mid-sized investment firm in downtown Chicago. My job, in the simplest terms, is to find what's hidden. Discrepancies. Patterns. Numbers that don't add up. Trails that someone tried to erase but couldn't quite finish. I am very good at my job. I have a master's degree in financial forensics from Northwestern. I run 6 miles every Saturday morning. I keep a 5-year budget spreadsheet that my best friend calls unhinged, and my former therapist called a healthy expression of the need for control. I make my own pasta on Sunday evenings. I call my Aunt Patricia every Tuesday night. I am, by every measurable standard, a competent, grounded, self-sufficient woman. But in my family, in the specific ecosystem of the Marino household where I grew up, I was simply the older one. The responsible one. The one who didn't need as much. Kara is 3 years younger than me. She is objectively beautiful. Dark eyes. The kind of easy confidence that fills a room without trying. She wanted to be a photographer, then a model, then a photographer again. My parents called every phase of this a passion. When I changed my major from pre-law to finance, my father said, "Are you sure that's exciting enough for you? I'm going to give you 3 specific moments. Not because I want your sympathy, I stopped needing that a long time ago, but because you need to understand the architecture of what happened. How it was built. How long it had been under construction." The first moment happened when I was 17. I had been accepted into a summer pre-college economics program at the University of Michigan. Competitive entry. Full academic curriculum. The program cost $4,200 for 6 weeks, and my parents had promised, in writing on a sticky note on the refrigerator, which I kept because even at 17 I understood the value of documentation, that they would cover it from my college fund. 2 weeks before the program started, my mother sat me down at the kitchen table and explained that they had used the money. Kara's Sweet 16 party had gone over budget. The venue deposit alone had been $1,800. The DJ had charged extra for the extended set. The custom cake had cost $600. My mother slid a piece of paper across the table. "An IOU. Her handwriting. We'll put it back before you start college. Promise." I never saw that money again. I went to Michigan on a partial scholarship. I found myself working 20 hours a week at a campus bookstore. Kara's Sweet 16 photos are still framed in my parents' living room. There's not a single photo of my college graduation on those walls. The second moment happened when I was 22. It was May. My graduation from Northwestern. I had walked across that stage with a 3.91 GPA, wearing heels I'd bought at a consignment shop, with my Aunt Patricia in the 3rd row because she was the only family member who came. My mother had driven Kara to a modeling agency open call in New York that same weekend. When I called to tell her I'd graduated with honors, she said, "Oh, sweetheart, we saw the photos your friend posted. You look beautiful. How's the weather there?" I said the weather was fine. I did not cry until I was back in my apartment with the door locked. The third moment happened 4 years later, the evening David proposed to me. I called my mother from the restaurant parking lot, still shaking, ring on my finger, barely able to form sentences. I was so happy. She squealed. She said congratulations. She asked about the ring size and the setting. And then, after a pause that lasted just a beat too long, she said, "He's so handsome, Elena. Honestly, Kara would have loved him." She laughed when she said it, like it was a compliment. I laughed too. I spent 7 years laughing at things that should have made me put the phone down. But here's what I need you to understand about David, because he wasn't a cartoon villain. He didn't announce himself as a threat. He arrived as a solution. When I met him, I was 26 and exhausted from spending my entire life being the low-maintenance one. David looked at me like I was the most interesting person in any room. He remembered details. He asked follow-up questions. He called when he said he would call. For a woman who had spent her whole life being the dependable one that nobody worried about, being seen by someone felt like oxygen. I married him 14 months after we met. And for the first 4 years I thought I had finally chosen correctly. Finally built something that was entirely mine. I spent 34 years being second in my own family. What I didn't know, what I could not have imagined sitting across from David at Enzo's on our third date, laughing at his broken Italian, was that he and Kara had made absolutely sure of it. Together. For 2 years, 4 months and 11 days. And I was about to find out exactly how. Chapter 3. 2 years of beautiful lies. I knocked on Kara's door at 9:31 p.m. on a Tuesday in October. She opened it wearing a cream-colored robe. Her hair was down. She was holding a glass of red wine Malbec. I noticed, the same bottle David always ordered when he wanted to impress someone. She didn't gasp. She didn't slam the door. She just looked at me. And in that single second, that half-breath between her opening the door and either of us speaking, I saw it. Not guilt exactly. Something quieter than guilt. Something almost like relief. Like she had been waiting for this moment for so long that its arrival was almost a comfort. Behind her, David was sitting at her dining table. Candles. 2 plates. A bottle of wine. Soft music from a small Bluetooth speaker on her kitchen counter. Dean Martin, which had been our song, mine and David's, since our second date. He stood up when he saw me. He said my name once. I didn't respond. I looked at the table. I looked at the robe. I looked at David's jacket hanging on the back of Kara's chair like it belonged there. Like it had been hanging there for years. And then I turned around and walked back to my car. I drove home. I made chamomile tea. I sat at my kitchen table until 3 a.m. And in those hours I did what I do best. I started reconstructing the timeline. Because here's what nobody tells you about betrayal at this scale. It doesn't arrive all at once. It arrives in pieces, slowly, like a puzzle assembling itself in reverse. And once you start seeing the pattern, you cannot stop. Every memory re-examines itself. Every alibi unravels. Every moment you dismissed as nothing suddenly becomes evidence. Let me take you back. All the way back to the beginning of what I now know was month 1. It started, as so many disasters do, with something that sounded generous. David announced at a family dinner, my parents' house, pot roast, a Sunday in June, 2.5 years before that October night, that he wanted to help Kara with her photography business. She had been struggling. Her client base was inconsistent. Her equipment was outdated. David said he had connections, industry contacts. He could mentor her, make some introductions, help her build a real portfolio. My mother looked at him like he had personally descended from heaven. My father shook his hand. I said, "That's really generous of you, babe." And I meant it. By month 6, David had helped Kara find a new apartment. A nicer one, in a better neighborhood, closer to the kind of clients she wanted to attract. He had gone with her to sign the lease while I was in Atlanta for a compliance conference. When I came home, he mentioned it casually over dinner. Helped Kara with some lease paperwork today. Landlord was giving her trouble about her credit history. I co-signed. I remember setting down my fork. You co-signed her lease? Just to help her get approved. She'll cover her own rent. I let it go. He was being kind to my sister. What kind of wife punishes generosity? By month 12, I noticed something at Christmas that I filed away and tried to forget. We were at my parents' house. Everyone gathered around the table. Kara across from David, me beside him. At some point during dessert, someone made a joke, I don't even remember what it was, and Kara laughed and David laughed, and for just a fraction of a second their eyes met across the table in the specific way that two people's eyes meet when they share a private language. It lasted less than 2 seconds. I told myself I was being paranoid. Paranoia, it turns out, is sometimes just pattern recognition that your conscious mind isn't ready to process yet. By month 18, David told me he was taking a long weekend for a work trip to Indianapolis. Manufacturing client. Quarterly review. He'd be back Sunday evening. I mentioned it to my mother on the phone Thursday morning. She paused. Then she said, "Oh, that's funny." Kara mentioned David was taking her to look at gallery spaces in Indianapolis this weekend. For her portfolio expansion. Another pause. I assumed you knew. I told her yes, of course I knew, I had just forgotten. I hung up. I sat in my car in the parking garage of my office building for 11 minutes before I could go inside. I still did not let myself know what I already knew. That is the cruelest thing about loving someone. The mind will protect the lie long after the heart has understood the truth. And then came month 24. A Tuesday in October. A blue dress. A restaurant called Enzo's. A text message from my sister meant for my husband. "Are you almost here?" The food is getting cold. 2 years. 4 months. 11 days. Every work trip. Every late night. Every moment he came home smelling like someone else's soap, and I told myself it was the gym. Every family dinner where they sat across from each other. And I poured the wine and refilled everyone's glasses, and made sure the conversation stayed warm. My parents knew. Not everything. But enough. My mother's exact words 3 days later, when I sat across from her at her kitchen table and told her what I had found. Elena. David needed someone warmer. You were always so difficult to reach. She said that to me. Her oldest daughter. Sitting at her kitchen table. Still wearing the same clothes I'd had on for 2 days because I hadn't been able to make myself do laundry. You were always so difficult to reach. I looked at her for a long moment. I thought about Michigan. I thought about graduation. I thought about the sticky note that was never honored and the college fund that paid for a DJ and a custom cake and a sweet 16 that I wasn't even the right age to attend. I said, "Okay, Mom." I drove home. And somewhere between her driveway and mine, something shifted in me. Not rage. Not grief. Something colder. Something quieter. Something that felt for the first time in my life like the very beginning of power. Because what my mother didn't know, what David didn't know, what Kara, sitting in her co-signed apartment surrounded by equipment paid for with money I was about to trace to its source, what none of them knew, was that I hadn't just gone home that Tuesday night and made chamomile tea. I had also gone into David's home office. And what I found in that filing cabinet was about to change every single thing. Chapter 4. What he kept in the filing cabinet. I want you to picture something. A home office. 12 by 14 feet. North-facing window. The kind of room that always felt slightly cold no matter what season it was outside. David had decorated it himself. Dark walnut desk, built-in bookshelves, a leather chair he'd paid $1,400 for and referred to as an investment. I had been in that room thousands of times. I had brought him coffee in that room. I had wrapped Christmas presents on that desk while he watched football in the living room. I had sat in that $1,400 chair and read while he worked late just to be near him, because in the early years of our marriage I still wanted to be near him. I knew that room the way you know any space you've inhabited for 7 years. The way the third floorboard creaks. The way the desk drawer sticks in humidity. The way the filing cabinet in the corner, a heavy gunmetal gray, 4-drawer unit he'd brought from his apartment when we moved in together, requires you to lift the handle slightly before pulling, or it won't open at all. I knew all of it. What I did not know was what was taped to the inside back panel of the second drawer. It was 11:47 p.m. when I walked into that office. David was not home. I had not expected him to be. I moved through the dark without turning on the overhead light, using only the lamp on the desk, the one with the amber shade that threw everything into warm shadow. I sat down in the leather chair. I looked at the filing cabinet for a long time. Then I got up, walked across the room, lifted the handle slightly, and pulled open the second drawer. The files inside were ordinary. Warranty documents, old tax returns, car insurance policies, the kind of administrative paper trail that accumulates in any household over 7 years of shared life. I flipped through them slowly, methodically. And then near the back of the drawer, my fingers found something that wasn't a file folder. A phone. A Samsung Galaxy. Not his primary phone. His primary phone was an iPhone, sitting on the kitchen counter downstairs where he always left it charging. This was a secondary device. Older model. No case. A small crack across the bottom left corner of the screen. It was taped to the back panel of the drawer with 2 strips of black electrical tape. The kind of hiding that looks casual until you realize how deliberate it is. How many times someone must have opened and closed that drawer, heart rate slightly elevated, making sure the tape was still holding. Peeled it free. The phone was off. I held down the power button. It took 40 seconds to boot. I know because I counted. No passcode. He had not put a passcode on it. Whether that was arrogance or carelessness or some unconscious desire to be caught, I still don't know. What I know is that when the screen came to life, the first thing I saw was a text thread. The contact name was a single letter. C. 847 messages. The thread went back 23 months. I sat back down in the leather chair. I read for 2 hours and 14 minutes without stopping. I am not going to read you those messages. Some of them I have tried to forget. Some of them I have not been able to. What I will tell you is what they confirmed, what they revealed, and what they gave me that I did not have before. They confirmed the timeline I had already reconstructed. Every work trip, every late night, every family dinner. It was all there, documented in real time in their own words. They revealed the depth of the deception, not just the affair itself, but the active coordination, the planning, the way they had discussed in specific detail how to manage me. Messages where Kara wrote, "She trusts you completely. That's what makes this work." Messages where David responded, "I know. I feel terrible." Followed 40 minutes later by, "What time should I come over?" He felt terrible for 40 minutes. Then he came over. But the messages were not the most important thing I found that night. The most important thing I found was in the third drawer. A manila folder, unlabeled, tucked behind a hanging file marked miscellaneous. Inside were 4 documents. The first was a bank statement for an account I had never seen before. A joint savings account. Account holders, David Marsh and Cara Marino. Opened 21 months ago. Current balance, $43,000. Deposits made in increments of $1,500 to $3,000, consistently, over the life of the account. Regular as clockwork. Regular as the direct deposits from David's salary that also funded our joint checking account, our mortgage, our life insurance premiums, and the vacation fund we had been building for a trip to Portugal we never took. The second document was a life insurance policy amendment. David had updated his $500,000 policy 14 months ago. The primary beneficiary had been changed. It was no longer me. It was Cara. He had not told me. He was not legally required to tell me in Illinois. I was not yet his named beneficiary on that particular policy, which he had taken out before our marriage and which I had, in 7 years of trusting him completely, never thought to verify. The third document was a home equity line of credit statement. Our home equity line. The one we had opened 3 years ago for emergency use or home improvements, and which I had largely forgotten about because we had never touched it. We had touched it. Or rather, David had touched it. 12 withdrawals over 18 months. Amounts ranging from $4,000 to $12,000. Total withdrawn, $85,000. I pulled up Cara's photography studio website on my phone. The equipment listed on her portfolio page. The studio space address. The lighting rigs, the backdrops, the editing suite she had mentioned at Christmas last year, casually like it had simply materialized. $85,000. Every dollar of it borrowed against the equity of the home I had helped purchase. The home I paid half the mortgage on every single month. The fourth document was a lease co-signature agreement. David's name beside Cara's, dated 20 months ago. I sat with those 4 documents in my lap in that amber-lit room for a very long time. Then I did something that surprised even me. I put everything back exactly as I had found it. The phone retaped to the back panel. The folder returned behind the miscellaneous hanging file. The drawer closed with a slight upward lift of the handle. I turned off the desk lamp. I walked downstairs. I made chamomile tea, and then I called my college friend Rebecca, who had graduated from Northwestern Law, and was now a partner at a family law firm on the North Side. It was 2:09 a.m. She picked up on the third ring. I told her everything, calmly, in chronological order. When I finished, there was a brief silence on the line. Then Rebecca said, "Elena, this isn't just a divorce case. What you're describing is financial fraud. Potentially criminal, depending on how the hellic withdrawals were documented. I need you to come in tomorrow morning. Don't touch anything. Don't confront anyone. Don't move any money." I said, "I know. I won't." She said, "How are you holding up?" I looked around my kitchen. The pasta maker on the counter. The photograph of our wedding on the hallway wall, visible from where I was sitting. David's coffee mug in the dish rack, still damp from that morning. I said, "I'm okay. I just needed to understand the full picture before I decided what to do with it." Rebecca was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You're going to be okay, Elena. You know that, right?" I closed my filing cabinet. I put the phone exactly where I found it. And I went downstairs and made David his favorite breakfast the next morning: eggs over easy sourdough toast, black coffee. And I watched him eat it across the kitchen table, and I smiled when he smiled, and I said I was fine when he asked how I was sleeping. He had no idea what I now held in my hands. Not the faintest idea. And that, I realized, was exactly the advantage I needed. Chapter 5. The 90-day setup. There is a particular kind of discipline required to dismantle someone's life carefully. Not with rage. Rage is loud, and loud people telegraph their moves. Not with tears. Tears invite negotiation, and I was no longer in a negotiating posture. With patience. With documentation. With the specific procedural step-by-step precision of someone who has spent 12 years finding exactly what people tried to hide and following it all the way to its source. This was, in the end, simply my job. Rebecca met me at her office at 9 a.m., the morning after I found the filing cabinet. We spent 3 hours going through everything I had documented the night before. I had photographed every statement, every document, the messages on the secondary phone, the insurance amendment, all of it on my personal phone before I left the office. Rebecca brought in a colleague, a forensic accountant named Marcus, quiet and precise, who asked questions in a flat, unhurried voice and took notes in a small leather notebook. When I finished laying out the financial picture, Marcus looked at Rebecca and said very simply, "The Helic withdrawals are the problem. If he misrepresented the use of funds on the draw requests, which it appears he did, that crosses into bank fraud territory." He turned to me. "Mrs. Marsh, do you have access to the original draw request documentation?" I said I could get it. He said, "Get it." Rebecca outlined a 90-day strategy. Quiet, methodical, airtight. She called it a containment and documentation phase. I called it the setup. Week 1. I retained Rebecca's firm formally, signing a retainer agreement for $8,500 drawn from my personal savings account. Money I had been keeping separately for years, a habit I had developed not out of suspicion but out of the financial conservatism that had simply always been part of how I operated. I signed a confidentiality agreement with the firm. I opened a new personal checking account at a different bank than our joint accounts, using my office address as the mailing address. I said nothing to David. That night at dinner he asked about my day. I told him about a compliance review I was running. He nodded in the way of someone who is physically present and mentally completely elsewhere. I refilled his wine glass. Week 2. I quietly redirected my direct deposit to the new account. This was legal, straightforward, and entirely within my rights. It was my salary, my deposit, my choice of account. I also contacted my HR department and updated my emergency contact from David to my Aunt Patricia. Small moves, each one individually unremarkable. Together, they were the beginning of removing him from the architecture of my financial life, one load-bearing wall at a time. Week 3. I hired an independent appraiser to assess the value of our home. I arranged the appointment while David was at work, met the appraiser myself, and had the results within 4 days. Our home had appreciated significantly since purchase. Current market value, $612,000. Outstanding mortgage, $287,000. Equity before the Helic, $325,000. Remaining equity after David's $85,000 withdrawals, $240,000. I forwarded the appraisal to Marcus. He called me that afternoon. "Mrs. Marsh, I need you to pull every Helic draw request document you can access. Online banking portal, paper statements, anything. I want to see what he listed as the stated purpose for each withdrawal." I accessed the portal that evening. David had listed every single withdrawal under one of 2 categories: home improvement or emergency household expense. He had used $85,000 of borrowed equity, borrowed against our shared home, to fund my sister's photography studio, her apartment lease, her equipment, her business operating expenses, and based on the bank statements from the joint account I had also photographed, a significant portion of the $43,000 he had been accumulating with her. Not $1 had gone to any home improvement. Not $1 had constituted a household emergency. Unless, I suppose, you considered his personal emergency, the logistics of maintaining a secret relationship with my sister for 2 years, a household expense. Marcus sent his preliminary findings to Rebecca by the end of that week. Week 4. This is the part that surprised even me. In reviewing David's tax returns, which I had full legal access to, as we had filed jointly for 6 years, Marcus identified something. David had been doing freelance financial consulting on the side. Private clients. Cash and direct transfer payments. Income that he had never disclosed to me and had never reported to the IRS. 3 years of returns. Approximately $67,000 in unreported income. Marcus set his pen down when he told me. He looked at me over his reading glasses and said very quietly, "Mrs. Marsh, your husband has a significant tax liability problem that he is currently unaware we are aware of." I said, "What are our options?" He said, "Several." Meanwhile, outside the walls of Rebecca's office, life continued as normal. David came home. David had dinner. David occasionally reached across the kitchen table and touched my hand and said things like, "We should plan that Portugal trip," and "I love you," with the specific ease of a man who believed completely that he had not been found out. My Aunt Patricia, my father's older sister, the woman who had sat in the 3rd row at my Northwestern graduation, the woman who called me every Tuesday evening without fail, reached out to me in week 5. She said, "Elena, I need to say something and I need you to hear it. I have known something was wrong for over a year. I didn't know what. I didn't ask. And I am ashamed of that. What do you need from me?" I told her. She said, "Tell me exactly what to do." For the remainder of the 90 days, Patricia hosted family dinners every other Sunday. She invited David warmly. She made his favorite dishes. She asked about his work with the specific attentiveness of a woman who had decided that the best thing she could do was keep him comfortable, keep him present, and keep him completely unaware that his wife's attorney was building a case in a law office 12 miles away. David came to every dinner. He brought wine. He helped with dishes. He was, as always, charming. Day 61. Rebecca filed for divorce. David was served at his office at 2:17 p.m. on a Wednesday afternoon by a process server who arrived while he was in a meeting with 3 colleagues. I was at my desk when it happened. I had not planned to do anything particular at that moment. But at 2:19 p.m., I looked out my office window at the Chicago skyline and felt something release in my chest, something that had been wound tight for so long I had stopped noticing the tension. It felt like exhaling after holding your breath for 2 years. Day 63. Marcus filed a formal report with the IRS regarding the unreported freelance income. This was not revenge. It was a legal obligation under the circumstances of our forensic review, and Rebecca had been explicit about that from the beginning. The IRS would conduct their own investigation on their own timeline. We simply made sure they had what they needed to begin. Day 71. The bank received notification of the divorce filing and the associated dispute over the Helix funds. The joint home equity line was frozen pending resolution of the proceedings. David called me 17 minutes after receiving the bank notification. I let it go to voicemail. His voice on that message was something I had never heard before. Not angry, panicked. The specific panic of someone who has just realized that the quiet, dependable woman they underestimated has been several moves ahead of them for 10 weeks. He said, "Elena, we need to talk. I know how this looks. I need you to call me back. Please." I listened to the message once. I forwarded it to Rebecca. Then I saved it as evidence because David in that voicemail had said the words, "I know how this looks," which Rebecca noted was a useful acknowledgement. He left 9 more voicemails that week, each one more desperate than the last. On day 90 he finally stopped calling. And I understood in that silence that he had finally consulted an attorney of his own. That his attorney had told him, in whatever words attorneys used to deliver bad news, exactly how strong my position was. He had thought he was building a secret life. What he had actually been doing for 2 years was building my case. Chapter 6. The settlement and the wedding invitation. Divorce proceedings in Illinois are rarely fast. Mine took 4 months, 2 weeks, and 3 days. I know the exact count because I marked each week in a small notebook I kept on my nightstand, not out of bitterness, but because I am the kind of person who needs to see progress in concrete form. Each week that passed was a week closer to the other side of something I had not chosen but was going to survive completely. I want to tell you what the settlement looked like because I think it matters. I think the specifics matter. I think women especially are told to be vague about money, to speak in general terms, to soften the numbers, to let the details dissolve into something more palatable. I am not going to do that. Here is exactly what happened. The marital home was sold. Given the equity dispute and the documented Hellick fraud, David did not contest the sale. Final sale price, $598,000. After mortgage payoff and legal fees, the net proceeds were divided. My share, accounting for the $85,000 in fraudulently drawn equity that had been established through Marcus's forensic report, $287,000. David was required to personally repay the $85,000 Hellick balance, as the court found the withdrawals had been made under false pretenses and for non-marital purposes. Kara's photography studio, funded with those fraudulent withdrawals, was reviewed as part of the asset proceedings. Because a significant portion of its startup capital was determined to be marital funds diverted without consent, the studio was legally dissolved. Equipment and assets were liquidated as part of the restitution process. The $43,000 in the joint account David had been building with Kara was subject to a separate civil action that Rebecca filed concurrently. Given the documentation, the bank statements, the transfer history, the secondary phone records, David settled that action rather than go to discovery. Settlement amount, confidential per the agreement. What I will tell you is that it was enough. The IRS investigation regarding David's $67,000 in unreported income was ongoing at the time of our divorce finalization. His liability, including back taxes, interest, and potential penalties, was his to carry forward entirely on his own. His company, upon learning of the fraud findings through the court record, which is in Illinois a matter of public record, placed him on administrative leave pending an internal review. I did not contact his employer. I did not need to. The legal system has a way of making information available to those who look for it. David Marsh, at the conclusion of our divorce proceedings, was facing a personal repayment obligation of $85,000, an IRS liability of approximately $67,000 plus penalties, the loss of half a year's salary during administrative leave, and the complete unraveling of the life he had been quietly constructing alongside mine. Kara lost her studio, lost the apartment David had co-signed, because a co-signer facing his own financial and legal exposure is not a stable foundation for anyone's lease agreement. She moved back into my parents' house at the age of 31. My parents called me the week after the settlement finalized. My father's words, delivered in the careful tone of a man who knew he had chosen wrong but was not quite prepared to say so directly. Elena, you could have handled this quietly. Instead, you burned everything down. I let him finish. Then I said, Dad, I didn't burn anything down. I just stopped being the one who puts out everyone else's fires. He didn't respond. I said goodbye and hung up the phone. For 6 months, I lived alone in a rented apartment on the north side of Chicago. 3rd floor. Corner unit. A small balcony where I drank my coffee every morning and watched the city come to life below me. I made pasta on Sunday evenings. I called my Aunt Patricia every Tuesday. I ran 6 miles every Saturday morning and felt, with each passing week, incrementally more like myself. Then on an ordinary Thursday in April, a cream envelope arrived in my mailbox. Thick cardstock. Gold foil seal. My name written by hand in blue ink. My mother's handwriting, which I recognized the way you recognize a sound you haven't heard in years. I stood at my mailbox and turned the envelope over in my hands. I already knew what it was before I opened it. David and Cara. A summer wedding. A venue in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. 200 guests. Black tie. Inside, tucked behind the formal invitation card, a handwritten note on my mother's personal stationery. Elena. Life is complicated and families are imperfect. We hope you'll consider attending. Be the bigger person. This is how we heal. I read it twice. Then I went upstairs, made tea, and sat down at my kitchen table with the invitation in front of me. I called Rebecca first. She said, "You don't have to go. You know that." I said, "I know." I called my therapist, Dr. Okafor, second. She said, "What does attending mean to you? What does not attending mean to you?" I thought about it for a long time. I called my best friend Simone third. She said, "Elena, whatever you decide, I'm flying in." I sat with the invitation for 3 more days. And then I did something that surprised everyone who knew me. I RSVP'd yes. Not because my mother asked me to be the bigger person. Not because I had forgiven anyone. Forgiveness, I had learned, is something you do for yourself on your own timeline, and it does not require attendance at the wedding of the people who wronged you. I said yes because I had something to say. I had spent 34 years being the quiet one, the responsible one, the one who absorbed and adjusted and made room for everyone else and never asked for anything back. I was going to Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. I was going to stand at that microphone. And for the first time in my life, I was going to say exactly what I meant, in front of every single person who had ever watched what happened to me and said nothing. I had 12 weeks to decide what I was going to say. I did not need 12 weeks. I knew exactly what I was going to say by the time I sealed the RSVP envelope, but I took the 12 weeks anyway, because I wanted to be ready. Not angry. Not performed. Not theatrical. Just ready. Chapter 7. Arrivederci. The drive to Lake Geneva takes about 90 minutes from Chicago. I left at noon. I drove alone, which was the only way I wanted to do it. Simone had offered to ride with me. My Aunt Patricia had offered to meet me at the venue. I told them both the same thing. Meet me inside, save me a seat near the aisle, and whatever happens, don't intervene. They both agreed. Reluctantly. The venue was called the Grand Willows, a restored estate property on the western shore of the lake. White columns. Manicured grounds. A ceremony tent overlooking the water, strung with thousands of warm lights that caught the late afternoon sun and scattered it across the grass like something out of a magazine spread. Cara had always had good taste. I'll give her that. I had chosen my outfit with the same deliberateness I bring to everything that matters. A deep navy dress. Not the blue wrap dress from Enzo's, which I had donated to a clothing drive the previous November. Something new. Clean lines. Long sleeves. The kind of dress that communicates exactly one thing. I am completely fine. I wore my grandmother's pearl earrings. The ones left specifically to me. The ones my mother had briefly and unsuccessfully contested in the estate proceedings 3 years earlier. I arrived at 3:45 p.m. The ceremony began at 4. The parking attendant smiled at me. The woman at the guest registration table smiled at me. 2 of Cara's friends from college, women I had known for years, women who had been at my own wedding 7 years ago, looked up from their programs when they saw me and then looked immediately back down. I smiled at them anyway. My Aunt Patricia found me during the cocktail hour. She squeezed both my hands and looked at me the way she had looked at me from the 3rd row at Northwestern, like she was proud of something she couldn't quite name yet. She said quietly, "You look beautiful." I said, "I know." She laughed. It was the first genuine laugh I'd heard all evening. Simone appeared at my elbow with 2 glasses of sparkling water. She knew I wasn't drinking tonight, that I wanted every word to land exactly as I had shaped it. She handed me a glass and said nothing, which is one of the many reasons she has been my best friend for 17 years. The ceremony was, by every external measure, lovely. The lights came on as the sun dropped toward the lake. The flowers were white and blush. The string quartet played something classical and restrained. 200 guests sat in gilded chairs arranged in perfect rows on the manicured lawn. Kara walked down the aisle in a gown that cost, I later learned, $8,400. She looked radiant. She looked nervous. Her eyes moved through the crowd and found me 3 rows from the front, beside my aunt, and for just a moment, just one fraction of 1 second, her composure flickered. Then she looked away and kept walking. David stood at the altar in a charcoal suit. He had lost weight since the divorce. His jaw was tighter. His eyes, when they found mine briefly as Kara approached, held something I had not expected. Not guilt. Not defiance. Fear. Good, I thought. And then I turned my attention to the ceremony and let the rest of it simply be what it was. A wedding. 2 people making promises. The specific theater of public commitment that means everything in the moment and is tested, as I knew better than most, in the quiet ordinary minutes that come after. The ceremony took 42 minutes. The reception began at 6. Toasts were scheduled for 6:30, during the first course. I had been placed on the program between Kara's college roommate and David's brother. A deliberate positioning, I suspected, bookend by people who would be warm and celebratory, with me sandwiched in the middle like something that needed to be contained. At 6:28 the MC, a cheerful man in a blue bow tie, announced the toasts. Kara's roommate went first. Funny, affectionate, 3 minutes, everyone laughed twice. David's brother went second. Warm, slightly awkward, a golf anecdote that went on a beat too long. Everyone applauded politely. Then the MC said my name. The room shifted. Not dramatically. Just perceptibly. The way a room shifts when everyone in it is holding the same unspoken question. I stood up. I picked up my glass of sparkling water. I walked to the microphone. 200 people looked at me. My mother, at the family table, had her hands folded in her lap and her eyes fixed somewhere slightly above my head. My father looked at the tablecloth. Kara sat very still, her smile in place, her knuckles slightly white around the stem of her champagne flute. David's hand covered hers on the table. I looked out at the room. I took one slow breath. And then I began. 7 years ago, I stood in a room not unlike this one, making promises I intended to keep for the rest of my life. I believed in those promises completely. I believed in the people around me completely. I believe that the family you are born into and the family you build are the 2 safest places a person can exist. I was wrong about some of that. And the process of being wrong, of discovering exactly how wrong, in exactly the specific detail that I eventually discovered it, was the most painful experience of my life. The room was very quiet. I did not look at Kara. I did not look at David. I looked at the middle distance, that space just above the crowd where a speaker looks when she is talking to everyone and no one simultaneously. I want to say something to David. I heard somewhere in the room a sharp inhale. David, you taught me something I could not have learned any other way. You taught me exactly what I will not accept. You taught me the difference between being loved and being convenient. You taught me that my standards were not too high. They were simply being applied to the wrong person. For that specific education, I am genuinely grateful. I turned slightly toward Kara's side of the room. And to my sister Kara, you showed me who my real family is. Not by being part of it, but by showing me with absolute clarity who was willing to stay when things became difficult. Who called? Who drove over? Who sat with me in rooms I could barely breathe in and didn't try to fix anything. Just stayed. You showed me the difference between family by blood and family by choice. And what I found on the other side of losing you was that my chosen family is extraordinary. I looked at Patricia. I looked at Simone. Patricia had tears on her face. She was not trying to stop them. Simone was sitting very straight, chin up, the way she sits when she is trying not to cry and has decided that not crying is a matter of personal honor. I looked back at the room. I am not here tonight to disrupt anything or to take anything away from this occasion. I am here because I was invited. And because I had something to say that I have been quiet about for too long. So I want to raise a glass, not to the couple, but to everyone in this room who has ever been the quiet one, the dependable one, The one who holds everything together and gets very little credit for the holding. To everyone who was told to be the bigger person when they were already carrying more than their share. To everyone who lost something they didn't deserve to lose, and found themselves anyway, on the other side of it. You are not what was done to you. You never were. I raised my glass of sparkling water. Cheers. The silence lasted 4 full seconds. I counted. And then from the far left side of the room, from a table near the window where the older guests had been seated, a single pair of hands began to clap. I turned toward the sound. David's grandmother. 81 years old. White hair. A pale lilac dress. A woman I had known for 7 years, who had called me every Christmas and remembered my birthday without being reminded, and had sent me a handwritten card when she heard about the divorce that said only, "I know. I'm sorry. You deserved better." She was standing, clapping slowly, steadily, looking directly at me. One by one, other hands joined hers. Not the whole room. I want to be honest about that. This is not a story where everyone clapped and the villains were visibly destroyed in real time. Some people looked at their plates. Some people looked at David. Some people looked at Kara, whose smile had not moved but whose eyes were very bright. But enough people stood. Enough people clapped. Enough for me to know that the quiet truth I had carried alone for 2 years had just been witnessed by more than the 4 walls of my apartment. I placed the microphone back in the stand. I walked to Patricia's table. I leaned down and hugged her for a long moment. She held on with both arms and didn't say anything. She didn't need to. I hugged Simone, who had, despite her best efforts, completely failed to not cry. I nodded once at my mother. She looked back at me with an expression I had never seen on her face before. Not anger. Not pride exactly. Something more complicated than either. Something that looked possibly like the beginning of understanding. I did not wait to find out. I picked up my clutch from Patricia's chair. I walked through the Grand Willows venue, past the white columns, past the warm lights strung across the ceiling, past the waitstaff carrying first-course plates toward tables that no longer required my presence. I walked out through the front doors into the cool Wisconsin evening. My car was at the far end of the parking lot. I walked the length of it slowly, in my grandmother's pearl earrings, in my navy dress, in the specific piece of a woman who has finally said what she needed to say and does not need to hear the response. The car service to O'Hare was already booked. It was waiting on the street outside. I had a 9:45 p.m. flight. Gate B14. Window seat. Direct to Rome. 12 nights in Italy, Florence, then Siena, then the Amalfi Coast. A solo itinerary I had built over 3 weeks with the specific care I bring to things that matter to me. Reservations at small family restaurants. A cooking class in a Florentine kitchen. A morning boat out of Positano with no agenda and nowhere to be. Paid for entirely from the $287,000 settlement. I settled into the back seat of the car service. Chicago passed outside the window and lights in motion. I thought about Elena Marino at 17, sitting at a kitchen table with a sticky note, doing the math on a college fund that was already gone. I thought about Elena Marsh at 22, watching her phone in an empty graduation hall, waiting for a family that was 2 states away. I thought about her at 32, sitting in a parked car outside her sister's apartment at 9:11 p.m., hand on the ignition, deciding whether to drive away. I am glad she knocked on that door. I am glad for every single thing that followed. Not because the pain was worth it. Pain is not a currency and I will not romanticize what was done to me. But because on the other side of it, I found something I had been searching for my entire life without knowing I was searching. I found out exactly who I was when everything I thought I needed was taken away. And the answer, it turned out, was enough. More than enough. The car pulled up to the departure terminal. I got out. I rolled my single suitcase through the automatic doors. I checked in, cleared security, found gate B14, and sat down by the window with a cup of tea and 40 minutes to spare. At 9:43 p.m. they began boarding. I gathered my things. I walked down the jetway. I found my window seat. And as the plane lifted off the runway and Chicago disappeared below me into a grid of lights and dark water, I pressed my forehead gently against the cold glass and felt, for the first time in as long as I could remember, completely, quietly, entirely free. Arrivederci. If this story stayed with you, if some part of Elena's journey felt familiar, I want to hear from you. Tell me in the comments. Where are you watching from? And what is the one thing you wish you had said sooner to someone who underestimated you? If you've ever been the dependable one, the quiet one, the one everyone leaned on and no one thought to check on, this channel is for you. New stories every week. Subscribe so you never miss one. And if today's story meant something to you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. You already know who that person is.